Agent Morris with the NSA.
There is something real here.
Did you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the first-hand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General. Biologics came to some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Those could represent exquisite new adversary technology.
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
The government is covering up some level of its knowledge and understanding about what some of those things are.
The Sol Foundation, which just announced a new initiative for UFO research and policy.
It's nuts, man. I mean, we're just small-town buds who saw a UFO in the woods. I mean, now we're hanging out with the government.
Wow. What floor were you guys on?
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another weekly edition of Anomaly-NOW, straight out of Austin, Texas. This is the weekly live news media roundup for the 501c3 nonprofit Anomaly Archives, aka the Scientific Anomaly Institute. I am your host, Smiles Lewis. Thank you for tuning in live or listening to the rebroadcast. And you can find out more about us at our website. That's anomalyarchives.org. And we've recently launched a Patreon fundraising community where you can go to patreon.com/anomalyarchives and you can find out how to donate on a monthly basis at various levels. At the $10 a month level, the Anomaly Academy Cadet level tier, you get access to our growing back catalog of monthly online lectures by various fellow Fortean anomalous, paranormal, ufological seekers of information and dare I say truth. Next week, or rather, excuse me, later this month of September 2024, I will be presenting about the Anomaly Archives. And then in coming months, we'll have Greg Bishop presenting on a subject, probably UFO related, as well as Joe Green talking on parapolitics and conspiracies, as well as then after that, Twee Snyder and various others that we've already got lined up in the months of the beginning of January 2025. And today's Wednesday. It is September 4th, 2024. Hope you've had a good weekend. And I sure did. I got to go see one of my favorite bands of all time, local favorites, Ed Hall. They have done 2 recent reunion shows, and boy, I really enjoyed dancing and moshing like I haven't in a very, very long time. So cheers to all that. Got a lot of ground to cover. You can, of course, go to our Flipboard, flipboard.com/@anomalyarchives, and find links to thousands of articles about all aspects of the paranormal, the anomalous, the Fortean, the strange, the mysterious. And you can come along for the ride. You can go to our website, anomalyarchives.org. The first items I do want to bring your attention to, we've lost 2 very important folks. Lauren Coleman over at cryptozoonews.com has reported on the passing of his brother, Jerry D. Coleman, another author, another cryptozoologist. Sadly, a lot of folks may not have been very familiar with his youngest brother, Jerry's work, but there was a lot of interest in cryptozoology in that household, apparently. It is a very long and comprehensive and touching reflection on the life of his brother and their family, and goes into some very solid detail about the work of Jerry, including his having created these awesome art cards about Fortean incidents and the books that he wrote, Strange Highways and More Strange Highways, and the help that he did in investigations that led to works by his older brother Lauren. And really sad to see him go. You can learn a lot about him by going to cryptozoonews.com and reading his brother Lauren's obit. There's also been news of the passing of a very famous researcher in the UFO field who is most known for his efforts to document the Majestic 12 documents. That is, of course, Dr. Robert Wood. His son, Ryan Wood, has penned this memoriam that is, I guess, only currently being distributed in an email form, but this is a web link for that. Some of Robert's academic credentials. Bob Wood's academic journey began with a BS in aeronautical engineering from the University of Colorado in 1949. He furthered his education by earning a PhD in physics from Cornell University in 1953. His early career saw him working for General Electric Aeronautics and Ordnance, followed by a 2-year stint in the U.S. Army at Aberdeen Proving Grounds. In 1956, he joined Douglas Aircraft, which later became McDonnell Douglas and eventually Boeing, where he spent an impressive 43 years. You can read more about him there. And of course, he's no stranger to the UFO scene, but he will be missed. Whatever you think about the Majestic 12 documents, I'm glad that there were folks out there digging deep into them. Now, this next article is going to be, I'm going to present this a little differently. And hopefully the audio will come through. If there's any issues, you'll let me know, I'm sure. And let's see here. This one's over at sentinelnews.substack.com by Baptiste Friscourt. Notes on Lou Elizondo, quote, "There's an existing relationship there to feed misinformation to the American public." In an interview published in Coast to Coast on August 25th, former secret program coordinator for the National Security Council, Lou Elizondo, answered questions from veteran journalist George Knapp. Now, I've continued reading up on people's explications of their reading of Lou's new book, Imminent. I'm not really jumping into reading that myself. I'd rather hear what other people are finding. I'm sure I'll get around to it eventually, but I'm reading like 5-6 different books right now. And I tend to take such copious notes that it's just not going to be on the plate for a while. But it's been very helpful to hear all these different people's perspectives on this material. And while I've probably more concentrated on my concerns and what I see as the negatives that I'm hearing about in this work, not least of which is the continuing controversy about what role Lou played in OSAP/ATIP and the details of that history. But also, as we criticized recently, Mick West and others have pointed out that Lou seems to get some of the basics wrong of the videos that he helped bring to the fore. Those 3 famous Navy videos that started so much of this new renewed discussion. But I must say, I found this article and attendant audio very helpful and interesting, and it leads to some very interesting locations, and hopefully this will come through. I'm going to play the audio clips here, but basically, to sum up, and then we'll sum up again, he's pointing out how the internal battles and the slagging of his reputation both, I think, preceded his departure and have followed since his departure. Hopefully this will come through.
Dana White was the original spokesperson for Jim Mattis. Jim Mattis is an individual who I served in Kandahar with in Afghanistan, and he was the Secretary of Defense, and his staff was briefed by me on a regular routine basis by other members of ATIP. So he knew what I was doing, and same with his staff, and they actually, for the first year, acknowledged ATIP was real. Yes, it was a UFO program, and yes, I was part of it. I was one of the senior ranking people there. And then only after Mattis left, after he resigned, my enemies that I had in USTI that I had sufficiently, excuse the vernacular, pissed off, they had, as you probably know, they launched an criminal investigation against me. And Air Force OSI in the paper said, actually, as a result of as a conclusion of the investigation, there is no wrongdoing. Lou didn't do wrong, and they actually acknowledged that the director of HIP, that he was doing that. But that wasn't good enough for my former boss. And my former boss, if anybody wants to know about what happened, all they have to do is look up a story.
Yeah, apparently lost the audio there, I believe. Let's see if I can get that back. Oops. Sorry, folks. Sometimes the service loses contact with the audio, and I think changing the here we go.
It was put together by a former detective, Tim McMillan, he did some stuff on Popular Mechanics, and then was also has something called The Debrief. It's a news outlet, and they exposed him. And my former boss was caught up in an IG investigation, and he was the one that was having reprisals against me, which was also one of the basis of my IG complaint, both the DoD and the intelligence community. And at the time, he had an individual who became a new Pentagon spokesperson who, when I talked to, first time, I said, why are they changing this? He told me on the phone, he said, Lou, I don't agree with this. I know what you did, but I'm being told by the higher-ups to put this statement out. It was very, very upsetting to me. And I said, well, how can you do that? He's like, Lou, look, I'm trying to fight it, but that's what they're doing. And I knew exactly where it was coming from. It's coming from my old boss. And then they have this, a new one came in, and she's a former colonel. I'm not going to mention her name because I don't want to disparage her. But the fact is, she's a colonel, and she is formerly trained in psychological operations. And she actually wrote a thesis to the Department of Defense saying that it is, one of her lines was, in essence, you can't separate psychological operations or quote unquote propaganda from public affairs duties. Now think about that for a second. And by the way, this individual has relationships with some of these bashers you're talking about. They worked previously together in a previous assignment. So there's an existing relationship there to feed misinformation to the American public through some of these bad actors. But anyways, with that said, this document she wrote a thesis on it. So think about that. There is a requirement to ensure that the American people and the American population is informed. And you cannot lie or deceive the American people. Now, they do all the time, but it's illegal. You're not supposed to conduct propaganda operations on the American public. You can't do it. And yet, that is exactly what is happening. And this person has continued to be caught flip-flopping and lying. And it's very simple. Did ATIP exist, and was I part of it? That's it. And they refuse to answer it. And they'll come back and say, well, I don't know why it's important for us to answer that, or he had no assigned responsibilities, and ATIP wasn't about UAP. Look, the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence himself, Ronald Moultrie, testified to Congress under oath that they looked at the ATIP files and they looked at the Blue Book files as part of the UAP review process. Senator Harry Reid himself, the actual program sponsor for OSAP and ATIP, said for the record in a memo what ATIP was and that I was part of it. I don't know how else to communicate that. At this point, people have to just do their due diligence. A simple word search on the internet will show it.
I just thought I thought this new answer was a new level of obscurity, in that there was no formal DoD-wide program established to examine reports. Well, that wasn't the question. No DoD-wide program?
There was a program. That's not true either. And we know that because Ronald Moultrie testified before the American people to Congress about it. And there's ample documentation. And the problem is that they keep changing their stories. Now, we know the Pentagon never lies, right? Except for, Iran-Contra and, the Pentagon Papers, and Afghanistan withdrawal, and, the list goes on and on and on and on. and they only, are forced to tell the truth when, they're caught red-handed. This is one of those cases where I'm cautiously optimistic that in the very near future, with some new members of an administration, even if it's the same administration, I think we can expect some turnover somewhere in the Pentagon. I think we're going to start seeing a change in their messaging, and I think people will be surprised because, look, enough people know who I was, what I was doing. This has been rehashed 1,000 times. There's senior people there's memos out there, for God's sakes. There's people in the secretary's front office that were being briefed every week by me. They know it. They've already talked to members of the press off the record. So at this point, it's kind of a fool's errand that they've backed themselves into a corner. And for me, George, I got to tell you, it's embarrassing because this is my beloved department, and it pains me not because they're doing it to me or other people. It pains me because at this point they just look silly. And how do our adversaries look at this when the government can't even get their own message straight, and they've changed it like 7 times in the last 6 years? Like, guys, can't you get one thing right?
Now, this doesn't change my feelings and sense of what's going on here. And I'm very open-ended about my interpretation of Lou and his efforts. I want to believe, like most people, that he's honestly interested in this subject and isn't deliberately or willingly going along with some larger agenda other than trying to speak truth to power and hold the military-industrial complex accountable. Given some of his other duties as military counterintel operative, I have concerns. I have grave concerns. But I must say that it's very helpful, I think, to let me see. I'm going to have to stop sharing this for a second and then reshare it. But this actually, let's see. That's still. So the article, or rather his quote, he mentions this article over at the debrief.org from 2022, Sex, Lies, and UFOs, Pentagon's head of counterintelligence and security ousted. And that's where the reprisals were centered from, was this person not liking him. But the most important thing here that he mentions is Sue Goff. He doesn't name her, and that's I guess, very high-minded of him. But this is the paper that's linked to and that you can find online, USAWC Strategy Research Project, quote, The Evolution of Strategic Influence by LTC Susan L. Goff, United States Army. To my knowledge, this is the Sue Goff that has been the DoD spokesperson, who's the one that's been issuing all these contradictory comments regarding Lou's service, that has contributed greatly to the disagreement and arguing in the UFO community about who he really is. And if this article is accurate in its claims that that she's advocating for basically the use of psychological warfare, psyops, propaganda against the American people, and equating it, like anybody with any kind of parapolitical sense knows, that they have been used, this idea of public affairs, public relations. This goes back to the old Nazi adage of, if you repeat a lie often enough, people will believe it's the truth. And this author, Baptiste, quotes from that paper, quote, first, DoD needs someone with the appropriate position and authority to oversee the policy and to coordinate DoD strategic influence activities among DoD public affairs, military psyop, and other military information activities. Equally fallacious in today's world of instant worldwide communications is the notion that you can separate military psychological activities from public affairs and public diplomacy. There is a prevailing misconception in the State Department and public affairs field that military psychological operations are not truthful, and that contact with PSYOP will somehow taint public affairs and public diplomacy. I would say that is exactly what has come home to roost because of the military-industrial complex, the national security state, and everything that was created post 1947, from the National Security Agency, NSA, no such agency, to the CIA, and all the way too many alphabet agencies that are part of the military intelligence complex that more often than not is interested in public affairs, just keeping us uninformed and distracted from the truth. Anyway, we'll be providing the link to this Evolution of Strategic Influence paper by an LTC, Susan L. Goff. If this is not the same person, apologies, but to my knowledge, this is, and I appreciate Lou bringing this to my attention. I was unaware that she had this background, and it makes it brings everything into a different focus, perhaps. Meanwhile, friends have brought my attention to, whatever you think of this select subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government from the U.S. House of Representatives. This is the report that they issued just over a year ago, the weaponization of CISA, how a cybersecurity agency colluded with big tech and disinformation partners to censor Americans. And, I really should have brought up links. There are articles that I've read for years that are mainstream news articles about how this has become the norm right under our noses, right out in the open. And it goes back to Eisenhower's famous speech warning about the military industrial complex and the rise of a technocratic scientific elite. All that said, just, be skeptical of everything, even me, please. All right, moving right along. One of the places I've been hearing a lot about Lou Elizondo are these guys, Klaus and Garrett, who do this Patterns Tell Stories podcast, which I really enjoy. I only found out about it fairly recently. I think it's gotten pretty popular. You can find it on your favorite podcatcher apps. I typically listen through Spotify. That's the link I'll give to the show notes for their most recent episode on Monsanto. And their most recent episode on Monsanto, of course, is keying off of details such as they are in Lou's book that list the many different aviation and other types of corporations that have been alleged to be linked to UFO reverse engineering, biologics engineering. And as much as they tend to totally take everything Lou says as gospel, and that does bother me a lot, I often find them bringing to attention things that I'd forgotten or that I think are important threads to pull on, or things that I didn't know about at all. But their most recent episode, they mentioned the whole Monsanto thing. That's the focus of the episode. And they go into some background that is, of course, interesting, but it could also be where Lou has been reading and hearing all this stuff, and he may not have any special information. And like the Arrow report said, this could all be the result of echo chambers and silos of information bubbles and the same people telling the same stories over and over and games of telephone. Hang loose, y'all. But in it, they also mention, of course, famously in The Day After Roswell by Philip J. Corso, he had stories about Monsanto and them supposedly getting the bodies. And of course, Monsanto has since been bought by Bayer, all of which reminds me, corporations who commit genocide or get caught doing non-voluntary human experimentation should be dissolved. That should be like standard operating procedure. But no, we still have IBM, we still have Monsanto, we still have Bayer, we still have all these corporations, these global evil corporate entities that helped facilitate the Holocaust. There's also in the recent episode of Patterns Tell Stories, they talk about a since passed young UFO researcher, Kenny Young, who did a lot of great research and apparently told his own story about hearing tales of Monsanto's connection to UFO biologics, reverse engineering, that sort of thing. So just something to think about if you're interested in listening to podcasts and hearing these kinds of information. You might go there. But there's, in that episode, they also talk about something that I've often railed against while I'm ranting, and that is secret biological testing on the American people. Besides like MK Ultra and that sort of thing, where they, victimized individuals, there have been repeated experiments in mass where so often these Nazi-influenced Operation Paperclip imported German scientists perpetuated horrific experiments on the American populace, often, if not exclusively, focusing on the most disenfranchised minority groups. And they talk about that in the Monsanto episode of Patterns Tell Stories. But what else should cross my feed but another blog called The Memory Hole, TMH, talking about another sinister series of experiments. And I'll just digress for a bit here, where they talk about these that occurred in 1966, secret subway experiments, the U.S. Army's germ warfare tests. U.S. Army scientists conducted a covert experiment in New York City's subway system, aiming to understand the spread of biological agents in a densely populated area. Equipped with air sampling machines and light bulbs filled with Bacillus subtilis bacteria, the team shattered these bulbs in subway tunnels to observe the dissemination of the bacteria among unsuspecting commuters. This goes on, and it's just a little note by this outlet, but you can find the documents and read them yourself. And like I say, they go into a different set of experiments in that Monsanto episode of Patterns Tell Stories. And you can also go check out The Memory Hole at Substack. And just continuing on with people's coverage of Lou Elizondo's Imminent, there is, of course, more from a different perspective, that of Kevin Randle, good old stalwart, old ETH UFO proponent, who has written so many books on the subject. And in this latest article, Imminent, the book, and the Council Bluffs UFO incident, he talks about the fact that this is another incident that is mentioned in Lou's book. But he is lamenting, again, what I and others are lamenting, this lack of anything new, to the point where it's like, I think even some dates are wrong. It just starts to make you wonder, like, okay, if this guy was supposed to be this new version of Blue Book and investigating these cases, why does he keep getting these basic facts wrong when he's been working on this book for at least a year, if not 2 years or longer, since coming public in 2017? You can find that over at kevinrandle.blogspot.com. Moving right along, let me ease up on my computer by closing some of these other pages. Here we go. Yes, I forgot last time to mention, and I was just talking to my helper Victor, who's watching, the man involved in every American conspiracy theory. That would be Daniel Peter Sheehan. If you haven't watched this video yet, it's 3 hours long. I highly recommend it. If you want to get like a quick, not quick, 3 hour long comprehensive overview of every major conspiracy in the United States, from the JFK assassination to various aspects of the UFO fields, controversies, look no further than Danny Sheehan. Danny Sheehan has been at the heart of so many of these things, from being involved with the Pentagon Papers and Watergate to defending John Mack and his the attempts by the establishment to get rid of him, to like I say, the JFK assassination, and among the many interesting tidbits of information that you will find here, the one thing that I'd never heard before that he claims is that Ingo Swann and Hal Puthoff were not just former Scientologists working in the remote viewing program, but that Ingo Swann was, according to Sheehan, he saw files showing that Ingo Swann was reporting back to Scientology as a spy on the Office of Naval Intelligence, among other establishments, I imagine. I don't know if that's true. I've not found that reference anywhere else. Perhaps it's been out there and I've just never known it. I know that there's a lot of people that criticize Jesse Michaels, whatever his name is, who hosts this American Alchemy podcast because of his connection and support of Peter Thiel and Bitcoin and things like that. But I have to say, I've found the interviews that he's done with all these big, interesting insider players to be very educational, and that 3 hours was very valuable to my time. Maybe you would find it that as well. Meanwhile, speaking of JFK, a little diversion here. Oops, let's get this. We're going. A local conspiracy researcher, JFK researcher, Richard Bartholomew, has a blog called Bartholoviews over at Substack. And again, stuff that I was not aware of. There's these two articles, Bartholomew versus the Wheel, an illustrated annotated edition of the abstract for my Rambler monograph that came out earlier last month. And something he posted a year ago that precedes this, called Roger and Me, Steganography, and Roger Craig's Getaway Car, an appended illustrated post of my 1995 essay. This is, I'm not going to be able to go into detail about this, but this is crazy. This is wild. So Richard Bartholomew is the author of a really good book on the deep state in Texas, all the connections to the JFK assassination connected to Texas. Obviously, so many people think that it was the military industrial complex that killed JFK, to the mafia, to the CIA, to Lyndon Baines Johnson, or all of the above. And some people think, as is explored in that video we were just referencing with Jesse Michaels, American Alchemy, talking about what was JFK killed because he was trying to release the UFO documents. I think it's probably more the war machine, but actually I should say Daniel Sheehan specifically states that the reason he thinks that JFK was assassinated was because the people in power considered themselves patriots and thought that his attempt to dismantle our nuclear arsenal at the behest of the Russians was unpatriotic and traitorous, and that it was their duty to kill him. That's pretty radical. But this article, again, it's going to be hard to explain, but suffice to say that in 1989, when I was a senior in high school, Richard Bartholomew discovered a car on the campus of the University of Texas here in Austin that matched the same type of car that was reported as the getaway car in Dealey Plaza, and that the Warren Commission apparently tried to suppress any references by the witnesses to this vehicle. And he found a Rambler of the same vintage sitting in the parking lot at UT for a very long time, under the subheading Insignificance and Relevance. He says, by May 1989, I was familiar enough with the story of a getaway car seen in Dealey Plaza, a story that was dismissed by the Warren Commission, to take more than a passing glance at an old Rambler station parked on the UT campus among the late model Hondas and Toyotas. It was anachronistic, but it interested me because it was the same make and model as the getaway car I had been reading about. I wasn't crazy enough to think it was the actual car. I was just glad to have a mental picture of a Rambler station wagon from that era. I had never really seen one. There were, however, some strange things about it that made me wonder whether or not its owner also knew the story about the Dealey Plaza getaway car and its role in the assassination. Again, it's way too crazy to get into, but it seems plausible and probable that this is the car. And it leads into some very interesting spider web, red string yarn, and corkboard conspiracy mind mapping that you might find worth exploring. And this is all over at Bartholomew's, Richard Bartholomew's blog over at Substack. All right. That's all I'm going to touch on. It's just way too much. Switching back to UFOs, David Metcalf, if you aren't familiar with him, you should check out his blog, Liminal Analytics, exploring the outer edges of society and mind, over at davidmetcalf.wordpress.com. That's David, Metcalfe. We had David and Mike Cleland and Greg Bishop on in the wake of 2022's opening of the Rice University Archives of the Impossible. And ever since I've become aware of David Metcalf, he is just a wealth of information on so many subjects, but particularly as it pertains to UFOs. And he has embedded himself with academia and has helped, is working on a fantastic multi-week class with Diana Pasolka called Beyond the Stars. You can find a link to it there at his blog. And he's been involved with so many other writers like Jeff Kripal and others. But of course, he often brings me into awareness of this, that, or the other news article or rare 45 UFO song singles to mainstream science articles. And often he posts over at our mutual friend Greg Bishop's Radio Misterioso Facebook group. And today is no different. Yesterday, he posted a link to this Science Alert article by Tony Milligan titled "Surging Belief in Alien Visitors is Becoming a Serious Problem for Our Society." He quotes the article, "Pentagon disclosure finally began during the early stages of Joe Biden's term of office, but so far there's been nothing to see. Nothing looks like an encounter. Nothing looks close. Still, the background noise does not go away. All this is ultimately encouraging conspiracy theories, which could undermine trust in democratic institutions." No kidding. So could the cover-ups. There have been humorous calls to storm Area 51, and after the storming of the Capitol in 2021, this now looks like an increasingly dangerous possibility. Too much background noise about UFOs and UAPs can also get in the way of legitimate science communication about the possibility of finding microbial extraterrestrial life. Astrobiology, the science dealing with such matters, has a far less effective publicity machine than ufology. And David rightly criticizes this article on a number of fronts, not least of which is, well, just going by Google Trends, looking for search terms, there doesn't seem to be any surge of this, even though obviously there has been an uptick since 2017 in talk of UFOs. And here is the article over at sciencealert.com from September 3rd. And yeah. And what this immediately reminded me of, and there's this paragraph here. Well, first he says, the belief is now rising to the extent that politicians, at least in the U.S., feel they have to respond. The disclosure of information about claimed unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAPs rather than UFOs, from the Pentagon has got a lot of bipartisan attention in the country. Much of it plays upon, and he links to some essay here, familiar anti-elite tropes that both parties have been ready to use, such as the idea that the military and a secretive cabal of private commercial interests are keeping the truth, the deep truth about alien visitation hidden. That truth is believed to involve sightings, abductions, and reverse engineered technology. Again, I'm skeptical of all that too, though I grew up believing in it until I finally read a little more widely and decided that, well, you know what, maybe not. I mean, I definitely think there's still these cover-ups and conspiracies going on, but I think more often than not, it's the fact that they don't know what's going on and they don't want to appear incompetent or impotent in the face of this strange phenomena. But what it also reminds me of is this book that I'm reading, The Abduction of Betty and Barney Hill, Alien Encounter, Civil Rights, and the New Age in America by Matthew Bowman, another religious scholar from, in this case, Utah, who has done a deep dive into the Betty and Barney Hill case. But what's really interesting to me is he's going into it, again, not trying to prove or disprove the nature of whatever it is they saw. He concludes that they saw something mysterious in the sky that they couldn't identify, but that the point in time they were at and the nature of their experience led them down the path towards conspiracy theory. And so on the one hand, I get sick of people worrying and grousing about conspiracy theory to the extent that it just becomes a pejorative and a way to dismiss legitimate interrogation of authority. But so much of what this author Matthew Bowman's writing is dealing with is the nature of how Betty and Barney both perceived authority and science and their role as citizens in it as a part of their religious beliefs as Unitarians. And it's fascinating. I'm just about halfway through the book. And I've been really enjoying getting to know Betty and Barney Hill a little better than I did before this book. But again, it comes down to this idea of, there is a danger there, but it's really important to recognize that science, the government, and the military need to better interface with us civilians. It's governing at the foundation of its power, and coming to terms with these things and communicating what's learned honestly and transparently. Now, ironically, that Science Alert author, what was his name? Tony Milligan, alludes to SETI and that sort of thing. And of course, we've been talking about Professor Simon getting some press and his claims that, they found an alien civilization signal in that old SETI at home data from decades ago. And there has been an increasing amount of reportage talking about the fact that, they did find a signal, but no, it's just radio interference. And this one's another one of those from PhysOrg. Inside the golden age of alien hunting at the Green Bank Telescope. This is just another run-of-the-mill article about SETI and looking for these things. And they're basically saying what we know, that now with artificial intelligence and better equipment, it is a golden age. And is ET calling? And so it goes on to give examples of famous incidents like the WOW signal. I thought it was right down here somewhere. Yes, there have been a few moments of heightened excitement in the SETI community, including the 1977 detection of the so-called WOW signal from the constellation Sagittarius, which remains unexplained. More recently, in 2020, the team identified Breakthrough Listen Candidate 1 from the nearest star system, Proxima Centauri. This is the one that Professor Simon and others have been alluding to, though it may not be the one that his contact is claiming they found the signal, but that's what it sounds like from all the kind of dancing around that Professor Simon has done, for whatever that's worth. Moving right along to other strange space news. The Starliner spacecraft has started to emit strange noises. I don't know what it's making. What's making it? This is not displaying correctly, but here we have, see, this is my browser having a problem. It won't load that image. So here is a clip of the interaction between the astronauts who are, I believe, still stranded and probably will be up there till February, what they're saying and hearing.
No, too. I've got a question about the Starliner.
Houston's with you, Butch. Go ahead.
There's a strange noise coming through the speaker, and I didn't know if you could connect into the Starliner and let me keep mic and let you hear. I don't know what's making it, but I don't know if it's something that maybe is connected between here and there, making that happen. But anyway, can you do that?
We can configure that, Butch. Give us a minute, and I'll call you back when it's ready.
Okay.
Station Houston on 2. We're configured for audio via hardline and CST. If you want to give us a call.
Okay, I'm in Starliner, and how do you read?
5x5. How many?
Okay, I'm gonna keep the mic up next to the speaker.
Copy.
Hear that?
At negative, Butch, we did not hear anything. All right, Butch, that one came through. It was kind of like a pulsing noise, almost like a sonar ping.
Yeah, I'll do it one more time, and I'll let y'all scratch your heads and see if you can figure out what's going on. Here we go. All right, over to you. Tell us if you figure it out.
Yep, good recording. Thanks, Butch. We will pass it on to the team and let you know what we find. And Butch, just to make sure I'm on the same page, this is emanating from the speaker in Starliner. You don't notice anything else, any other noises, any other weird configs in there? Okay, thank you.
Houston on 2, got a question about Starliner.
Houston's with you, Butch. Go ahead.
So, yeah, who knows what the heck that is? Like they said, it sounded like a sonar ping. Very strange. Again, David Metcalf has brought our attention, thanks to his post over at Radio Mysterioso Facebook group. Oh, I hope I got this ready. This Dr. Pippa Malmgren, I'm not familiar with her, but she gave this presentation aboard one of these TED Talk Summit type cruise ship conferences, with the quote that he excerpted here. It's very interesting that Werner von Braun, in his personal diaries at the Trinity event, which was the first nuclear explosion in human history, describes a whole bunch of orbs showed up in the sky. Well, let's actually listen to see. Hopefully, oh, wait a minute. Is the sound going to come through? Hold on a second. I'm going to make sure here. Start from scratch. Hopefully this will work. Here we go. It's really quick.
Fast forward to 2021. We have actually had press conferences from all kinds of scientists and senior military officials talking about how some phenomena shows up whenever we go live with nuclear weapons. By the way, it's very interesting that Werner von Braun, in his personal diaries, at the Trinity event, which was the first nuclear explosion in human history, describes a whole bunch of orbs showed up in the sky. Weird. Question is, why don't we ask questions? Where is our curiosity? Answer, because this has all been heavily suppressed because of the geopolitical implications of acknowledging that it was true.
Now, I don't disagree with her, but as others who are better aware of history than me point out in the responses to this post, von Braun wasn't in the United States when the Trinity explosion happened. And of course, then this gets into, well, then where did she get this information? And she mentions his diaries. Well, okay, so to my knowledge, and maybe somebody can find and post this, but I don't know where there's any digitized versions of his diary. So then where does this come from? Well, I'm sure there are people who have read those diaries. And in fact, it's quite likely that maybe Carol Rosen, who's famously said that as the assistant of von Braun, she's the one who, through the Greer messaging, has said that von Braun told her about the escalation of threats that was going to be foisted on the people of the Earth, including ultimately an alien invasion, a fake alien invasion. And I've never been able to verify how she knows this other than her claim that she worked with him. And I don't know that anybody's contradicted her claim in that regard. But it just gets to this issue of, like, you hear these stories and you want to try to verify it. Where's the sourcing for this? But what is interesting also is that users at the group, like Barbara Fisher, who does the 6 Degrees of John Keel podcast, was commenting about having, let's see, she says, there are reports from eyewitnesses in Hiroshima and Nagasaki also seeing balls of light during and in the aftermath of the explosions. Read them in To Hell and Back, The Last Train from Hiroshima by Charles Pellegrino. It's a horrific narrative from survivors. I couldn't read it all in one go. had to read it in bits and pieces. And of course, Mirzar, that's Martin Kottmeyer, famous researcher, quotes those very passages. And yeah, these are very strange stories. Multiple incidents that he quotes here from pages 165, 179, 269, of these weird balls of light or blue flames. Some very interesting information. Of course, I will put the links in the show notes after the show, usually tomorrow. But this is very intriguing. But again, it just gets into this area of like somebody who, in this case, she's speaking to a audience of like entrepreneurs, high level business people, spreading this misinformation. It's hard to say, but it reminds me of other examples of that, like the claim that von Braun also saw a crashed UFO at Roswell and bodies. Where does that come from? Well, the less than sometimes accurate George Filer who used to do the Filer's Files, put out back in, I think, 2006, this bit where, again, it's like a game of telephone. Russ Hammerly writes, after World War II, a number of highly regarded German scientists were brought to the United States under a program called Operation Paperclip. Their leader was Dr. Werner von Braun, who was the technical director of the Peenemünde V2 Rockets Research Center. After the war, he worked on the guided missiles for the U.S. Army and was later director of NASA's Marshall, blah, 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 blah. In Robert Trundle's book, Is E.T. Here?, he discusses Clark C. McClellan's relationship with von Braun. After a manned flight awareness meeting, McClellan and von Braun left the Cocoa Beach Ramada Inn and met in a back patio. Von Braun's scientists were launching V2 rockets at the White Sands testing range in 1947, not far from Roswell. McClellan asked von Braun, did the Roswell incident happen and was an alien craft recovered along with alien bodies? Von Braun raised when he asked him the following questions. And that's a really weirdly stated sentence there. Von Braun lit a cigarette, raised his eyebrows, thought for a second, and then began to discuss the crash openly. He explained how he and associates had been taken to the crash site after the bulk of the military personnel had left the scene. Von Braun stated, quote, the exterior of the spacecraft was not metal as we know it, but appeared to be made of something biological, like skin. McClellan's only thought at the time was that he was being told that the craft was made of something alive. And yes, there were alien bodies which were being kept in a medical tent near the UFO. The beings were small, very frail, and reptilian in nature. Von Braun compared their skin to rattlesnakes that he and his group had encountered at White Sands. Von Braun said, quote, he was puzzled by the nature of the debris. The material was very thin, aluminum colored, similar to chewing gum wrapping paper. Now, this has been repeated. You can actually find the original Filer's post at archive.org. And this has been repeated more recently by somebody writing through the Roswell Daily Record of all places. Christina Stock on March 2nd, 2020 relays the same basic story. Let's see, various speculations and inferences over the years have been made as to who some of these experts might have been. For example, my own conclusions about consultation with Robert Oppenheimer, in addition to another interesting choice, has come to light. And then she basically repeats the same story that, and she cites researcher George Filer, that article, and the Trundle book, Is E.T. Here?, who citing Trundle citing McClelland. It really seems like a game of telephone. And who is the alleged astronaut? Well, you can find this old Yahoo News article from 2015. Former NASA man says he saw alien, but it's really hard to verify this guy's credentials. Clark McClelland, who is supposedly a former NASA engineer and who claims to have seen a 2.7 meter tall alien while monitoring a space mission. Mysteries within mysteries. You can find out. I've got links to some of this stuff and the people that are referenced: Hammerly, Russ Hammerly, and Robert Trundle over at the Anomaly Archives website. But yeah, what to make of that? Really not sure. It's probably all bunk, you think? Okay. Heading into the home stretch. More lucid dreaming. So that company that we've been reporting on, their experiments to control devices in waking reality, in meat space, from the lucid dream space, have resulted in this headline: lucid dreamers drove virtual cars while asleep in an incredible experiment. Yeah, this is pretty interesting. So they trained these lucid dreamers to, while awake, flex muscles in subtle ways to steer a virtual vehicle right and left to avoid obstacles, and then got them to into the dream state, and they would signal these obstacles with lights flashing through their closed eyelids, and the lucid dreamers were able to use that trained muscle control to avoid the obstacles and drive the vehicle around the obstacles in this virtual driving experiment. That just strikes me as next level weird. I find it fascinating, and gosh, really, where could this go? Meanwhile, over at sciencesources.eurekaalert.org, matching dinosaur footprints found on opposite sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Tracks show the last place dinosaurs could travel between Africa and South America before the two continents split. This makes me wonder, if you've got flat earthers, what are people who deny Pangea or Gondwana land or the idea of continental drift? Well, basically, these researchers have found identical tracks dated to about 120 million years ago. They're not saying that like one starts in one continent and goes on the other continent. They're just match as far as the geologic timetable to indicate that, yes, back when these creatures roamed the earth, these locations were contiguous. And so you would see these tracks on now either side of the South Atlantic Ocean. Pretty interesting. Dinosaurs made the tracks 120 million years ago on a single supercontinent known as Gondwana, which broke off from the larger landmass of Pangea, said Jacobs. Quote, one of the youngest and narrowest geological connections between Africa and South America was the elbow of northeastern Brazil, nestled against what is now the coast of Cameroon along the Gulf of Guinea. Jacobs explained, quote, the two continents were contiguous along that narrow stretch, so the animals on either side of that connection could potentially move across it. And in privacy news, we all knew it. We all know it. Shocking leak suggests your phone really is listening in on your conversations. Okay, it's the Daily Mail, but they're citing this website, 404media.co, whose here's the pitch deck for active listening ad targeting, which basically just confirms what we've been hearing and believed for quite some time, that every device that has a microphone can be used to surveil you and used to sell you things. Make of that what you will, believe it or not. I know that there are perfectly good explanations just on the wealth of other data that these advertising companies have at their fingertips. But it's been known for a long time. And yes, it was Alex Jones that I first ever heard the suggestion that your cable box has a microphone in it back in the 1990s or late 90s, early 2000s. I forget when I first heard him say that, but that was probably the first place that I ever heard this idea. That doesn't mean I'm going to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, oh, Alex Jones said it, so it's all bunk. You just pay attention to science and technology reports and presume the worst about humans and their desire, their greed for making money, and it just means they're going to do whatever they can with whatever they've got. All of which reminded me, of course, of my own experience with this. We've all got our personal stories. Over at my blog, smileslewis.com, back in 2018, I posted a collection of these incidents that had happened to me. In this case, what spurred it was a synchronicity involving the linguist, a local UT linguist, Pennebaker. I wrote, at the end of a lunch meeting today, I mentioned UT professor Dr. Pennebaker and his textual analysis work. Within an hour and a half of that conversation, Facebook put this suggested post in my mobile Facebook feed. Lecture, James Pennebaker, Expressive Writing and Wealth, and Health. And I took a screenshot of it, but for whatever that's worth. And yeah, what does that mean? Okay, is it a coincidence? I don't think so. Now, I had probably at that point been searching for it, even though I said I wasn't, but I don't remember at the time. If I said I wasn't, I probably wasn't. Yeah, here I said, I've not been performing recent searches for the unique name of Pennebaker, so I don't think this is a case of algorithms predicting things to put it in my path, but perhaps so. And then I flashed back to the first time this really happened to me, that I was able to really just go, okay, this is insane. In Thanksgiving of 2011, basically, day before Thanksgiving, I was at a relative's house. They had just gotten new hardwood floors. We talked about it a lot. It was mentioned in multiple conversations. I was there less than 24 hours, but I didn't go searching on my phone, which is the only computer or internet access I had at the time. But that's also how I listened to, at that time, probably Pandora for music apps. So I'm leaving the house where these conversations had occurred and put on Pandora, and within minutes, an ad comes on for flooring. And I'd never at that point ever heard an ad for flooring on that Pandora app. Now this, kind of thing happens a lot. And ultimately I started referencing this as synthetic synchronicity. There was an incident that happened where, yes, this was it, where this image of Babindum, the Michelin man, the kind of bubbly Michelin man, whose appearance is often there's been a number of weird entity cases, including some with UFOs, where there were Michelin man type entities. And I was contacted by Diana Pasulka, who then reprinted this in her book, American Cosmic. You can find it on, I think it's pages 270, 271, or no, excuse me, 176 and 177. Where there's scans of it there. But basically she reprinted just what I said, and she just kind of talked about the fact that these kinds of synchronicities are occurring, obviously with increasing frequency because of these technologies and the surveillance state that we live in. Yeah. Oh, and one last thing for tonight. Thank you all for bearing with me. I've mentioned this blog many times. It's Getting Spooked over at Tanner F. Boyle, BOYLE.substack.com. Tanner Boyle is a writer, researcher who, like me, likes to look at UFO and paranormal landscapes through the parapolitical lens of skepticism. And he's done some great analysis, and his most recent is this Christopher Bledsoe and the UFO Cult of Intelligence, Part 6. He's done a number of series, including on the Gulf Breeze 6, and the Space Kids and the Indigo Kids, and all these weird confluences with mind control across all these paranormal and UFO fields. Highly recommend his blog. There's a lot of free content there. And of course, he's highly critical of Diana Pasulka, and I think rightfully so, even as I find her to be an important voice in this new wave of UFO discussion. But again, we should be able to have conversations, civil conversations about these subjects, and not get caught up in labeling this person or that person a disinfo agent, even when we do have our concerns. And so with that, I will say good night, folks. I really appreciate you tuning in, and I hope that you've enjoyed the show. If you could subscribe, do all that stuff, spread the word. We really need the help. Anomalyarchives.org, patreon.com/anomalyarchives. These are ways that you can support us at those websites. And we got a PO box you can snail mail us to, and As I said, I'll be giving a lecture later this month about the Anomaly Archives as part of the Patreon presentations. And then coming up in October, we've got Greg Bishop. Probably in November, Joe Green doing a presentation on conspiracy theory of one variety or another. And then Twee Snyder in December, and then more going into 2025. So thank you all very much, and enjoy this close-up view of our wonderful poster by Red Pill Junkie. Good night.
Mm-hmm.